Welcome to a Fresh Story podcast. This season, we're digging into all things divorce. We'll be discussing the ins, the outs, the nitty-gritty, all that stuff we don't talk about. Well, we're going to talk about it. Join us for everything you've always wanted to know about divorce, but were afraid to ask. Remember, you're not alone. Let's dive into divorce together. Olivia here. With all life experiences we encounter, often what actually empowers us the most is hearing about other people's stories, their personal successes and triumphs. Simply put, how did they survive this thing? Because if they could do it, I can too, right? Okay, so let's flash back for a moment to the fall of 2019. I was newly separated from my husband. We had just begun working with a mediator during the divorce process. After I'd put the kids to bed at night, I'd flop on my couch and turn on Jane the Virgin. One night, as I was watching the show, a familiar name flashed on the screen: Dara Resnik. Dara, a screenwriter, producer, and award-winning director, worked on Jane the Virgin. And, in my depressed stupor, I reached for my phone and shot a text out. You see, Dara wasn't just a writer and producer of Jane the Virgin. Dara was an old friend. An old friend who had gone through a divorce. I'd known Dara my entire life, and though we hadn't spoken in some time, I sent a text along the lines of, "I'm getting divorced and no one knows yet." Immediately, a text came back that said, "Call me day or night, you're not alone." Not only had Dara been divorced and a single mom, but her divorce also was a huge fresh start for her career, as her husband had been her writing partner. Dara has since been a rock for me as I healed, and as she found love again, a major inspiration for me as well. We got the chance to sit down with Dara and talk about how she weathered the storm of divorce and single parenthood with humor, pride, and integrity. If you are listening to this episode and going through a divorce, please know that you are not alone. And if Dara and I can do it, you can too. Okay, here's Dara. Dara Resnik is a screenwriter, producer, and award-winning director. Dara has been involved in the writing and producing of television series such as Pushing Daisies, Castle, Mistresses, Jane the Virgin, Marvel's Daredevil, and Shooter. She is the co-creator and showrunner of Apple TV's Home Before Dark. Dara is a single mom and lives in Los Angeles with her daughter. She also participated in the LA Marathon and is involved in, is it IKAR or ICAR? ICAR, a Los Angeles-based progressive Jewish congregation. And all of those things are wonderful, but to us, Dara is the big girl at the pool who gets us chips and is the big sister. So
yeah, who lets us gives us piggyback rides.
Yeah, Dara has known us our whole lives. I think probably since 19. Actually, we were telling our mom about this episode. She goes, "I remember when Elise was pregnant with Sammy." So, long time.
Quite literally our whole lives.
Our whole lives. We grew up together. We say we're faux cousins.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are thrilled. Dara and her sister Sam are like our sister cousins. And so we're just thrilled to have this beautiful person here today with us. So thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule of doing all the things you do to talk to us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so excited for what you guys are doing. I think it's providing really great information and comfort to, people like me who didn't have this, when I began my fresh start.
And how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Don't you think that even when I ran through my life and checked all the boxes post fresh start, and even when you do all of that, and we were talking before the podcast started about you look at your Wikipedia and you're like, whoa, I did some things. I like to tell my students, I love to teach on the side, and I tell my students, it doesn't matter how successful you are, that does not fill the void. And so mostly I'm great, and sometimes this shit sticks with you.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, perfect segue, which is, why don't you take us back to the beginning of your fresh start story?
So I did two things at the same time when I had my fresh start. I blew up my writing partnership and my marriage simultaneously. I met my ex-husband when we were in film school, first day of film school at USC, the class of 03 from the Peter Stark producing program. And we sold our thesis script together, which became a movie called Sydney White, starring Amanda Bynes.
I love that movie.
We're all
Big
known
fan
movie.
of that movie.
Yeah.
It's like you're one of like, you know, I think you're probably right in like the teeny tiny target of like the
We
right
know all
age
your
and-
work.
and
My
gender.
ex-fiance loved that movie. He really connected with it for some reason.
I mean, like it's also like a little Revenge of the Nerds, but like it was
Yeah.
marketed to like a very specific tween audience. And we were successful really quickly out of film school. And there's something very sexy about, like, my ex-husband's very handsome. He's like tall and broad with, you know, he's part Mexican, dark skin, like really charming. And together we were like a sort of a powerhouse of like the mid-aughts, and we were like selling scripts all over town and getting these great jobs. And we didn't ask each other, I think, any of the questions that people should ask each other before they get married, of like, what are your goals? What are your ethics? What are your like, I actually think in some ways, you guys know my parents well. My parents kept drilling into me like Jewish. And I like struggled with the whole, like the fact that he wasn't Jewish thing. And I think and I was wrestling with that, and eventually sort of came to terms with he's not going to be, and we're going to raise our kid Jewish, and that's fine. And she is. But like more than that, I should have been asking like, what do you want in life? And like, there are all these common things that, you know, we weren't talking about. But we were very successful. And then when we were on the show Castle, I realized I was miserable. I had like, again, goes back to racing through life and checking boxes, like everything, like made a movie, was like a high level writer on a very successful show, making money, owning a house, 2 adorable dogs, a really cute baby. Like the picture, like our family pictures looked amazing, and everything that was happening behind the scenes was really dysfunctional. And that actually started to eventually creep into some of the work. You know, definitely there were people on that staff who were like, the way they're talking to each other is not particularly kind. And we ultimately ended up sort of splitting off on that show into like, one of us would be running the room, the writer's room, and one of us would be on set. And I got a lot of encouragement. I think I, like many women, had this sort of imposter syndrome. I mean, people have imposter syndrome, but I think women have it really deeply. And Marta Kaufman talks about that in her Humanitas Award speech, if you ever want to look up like someone who's like wildly successful and still talks about imposter syndrome. And all these producers were like, you're really good at this, you could do this on your own. And that made me think, because I had until that point been like, even if I wanted to break up this marriage, how would I even go about doing, like, how do I have a career on my own? Because everybody tells you when you're in a partnership, like just a writing partnership, forget about being married to your partner, that you have to start all over again. And sometimes one person's successful and the other person isn't. And I spent, we secretly separated. So we were coming in every day for the second season we were on Castle, which was season 7. We were coming in every day and pretending to be married on Twitter, and we were married, but we were living in separate places and like doing therapy and like trying to figure out what we
functionally
were doing.
Not together.
Very functionally not together, very functionally like co-parenting.
Yeah, your daughter was very little.
Very little. When I moved out, she was 2 years and 3/4. And we can talk about that. That was a whole thing.
Yeah.
But we were going in every day to work and being like, we're adorable and married, and then like going to our separate places at night.
By the way, that's a show you should write.
Yeah, I would watch that show.
I started to write a pilot that I haven't been able to quite crack, called Consciously Uncoupled. That's sort of what it's like it's the happy fun version of it. Obviously it was not all happiness and fun. It was like,
it'll be a great sitcom.
Well, it's like the Fran Drescher one, like Happily Divorced or whatever, which was about her divorce, which I'm sure was a little bit more difficult than what you would like us to think on screen.
Totally. Yeah. And you know, we'll talk kindly about my ex-husband and all that, because he's my daughter's father during
Yeah.
this podcast, but it's not, and we do co-parent. I will say, like, genuinely, we co-parent more functionally than many, 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 many people I know. But like it's been a lot. It's a lot of work to get there. Like we go still to family therapy whenever something flares up, because it's like, no, I'm not re-entering this dynamic that was like dysfunctional and in our relationship. I need like a third party to like help parse out what needs to happen so that we're doing what's best for our kid. So in any case, during that whole year, I wrote on my own. It was the first time I had ever written, not ever, it was the first time since like my early 20s that I had written things on my own. And I was teaching, which was also part of what my therapist liked to call my individuating. And in 2015, I filed officially for divorce. And the sort of way it all went down too, in terms of like the actual fresh start. So we had this house together, and I basically had said to him, here are things that like I was learning boundaries. You guys know my parents. I love them very much. There were no boundaries in my home growing up.
I don't think any Jewish family has
and
boundaries.
meshed families from New York. I mean,
it's just like the bathroom.
You couldn't. There were no boundaries. You couldn't. We had to run. We're on the go. Come on. People are chasing us. Let's go. Let's go. Get out of the bathroom. Like
Totally. So it's like, yeah. So I was learning about boundaries, and I was like, okay, here are the things that are not okay with me anymore. Like, no more screaming, no more throwing, no more, like the list was long. Here are the things that are not happening. And when those things were still sometimes flaring up, he was sort of, I think, tired of me like constantly like on him about these things. And so he actually started to look into a post-divorce, a separation apartment situation. And sort of was like thinking about it and then backing out and thinking about it. And then I ended up just taking the apartment that he had ended up finding, because I was like, well, look, like you found it. Like there's no real argument here, because he had already worked out the finances and whatever. I sort of felt like, in a lot of ways, I don't know, I ended up in that apartment for 5 years. It had cut cheese ceilings and wooden fans, and like, I mean, it was like a relic of like early 90s LA architecture. And I did not expect to end up there for 5 years. Which I did mostly to like create stability for Orly and make sure she had like a place that was just like stable, or at least my daughter. But I knew that it was a place where we wouldn't have to argue, and I was really tired of fighting.
Well, I have so many questions and I've forgotten them. What was it like when you guys separated and like you're pretending to be married and then you're coming back into Castle? Was it easier to be kind to each other and to sort of get back to that original, like, was it a better workplace environment once that was aired out?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly, I think it was mentally healthier for both of us to get a little bit of space.
Yeah.
Right? Because we'd been so intertwined for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for literally since we met, basically.
Yeah.
But I do think that was really important. I also think writing together, as frustrating as that sometimes was, reminded us of like why we fell in love to start with. I literally was in the car with Orly yesterday, talking about because she was talking about travel, and she's going to some places she's going to go with her dad. And I said, Dad and I used to travel a lot. She said, really? I said, yeah, we went to Argentina, and we went to Ireland, and we went to England, we went to Portugal, we went to China. And she said, really? She's like, wow, that's a lot. And I said, I really loved your dad. I said, I don't want you to think that like I married your dad and didn't love him. I said, and I still care about him as your father. I said, but like, I was deeply in love with him. And I said, I also want you to know that, because I want you to know that just because at some point, if you love someone and then you realize that you don't anymore, that doesn't mean that you didn't love them when you started.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really important for them to know.
And so I think it's especially important for the kids to, I'm curious to hear, obviously, Olivia, how you discuss all of that with your kids, but like, I think especially because I'm in my first relationship since like my first real serious relationship since the divorce. It's been almost 8 months, and it's like really lovely, and it's healthy, and it's wonderful. It took 8.5 years to get there. She hasn't seen her mom in a relationship, like a loving relationship. And I think it's important to talk about those things, because like at some point she will hopefully find a partner of her own, or many partners of her own whenever she wants. And I want her to like have some of these ideas, even if she hasn't seen them in action.
I agree with you. I do the same thing, Dara. Like I think that there's so much to talk about with that, because I feel like people get so black and white about it, right? So it's like, oh, it's their father. But you know what? I'm the same way. Like, I show them wedding pictures. I'm like, I even just the other day, I did the same thing. We drove past the restaurant here in Huntington that I had my first date with him. And I was like, hey, Wyatt, that's where your dad and I had our first date. Like, I talk about how much I appreciate his music and all the things, right? Because that's who they are.
Yeah.
Right. And and I've always felt very strongly about this, that when you are separated or divorced or whatever, your children are going to like really wonder where they come from. Right. And so when you put down the other person, you're putting down your kids.
Yeah.
And so I love that. And I think and like you said, to teach them that love does not always have to mean till death do us part, and you can love people and you can respect them. And so I love all of that. So what was it like now? That was probably the first time you lived alone, right?
It was funny that you say that. Yeah, it actually was, because I had, had not only lived alone, had my own room. Really.
Wow.
I had lived I shared a room with my sister growing up, and then went to college, and then came out here and went to grad school. I guess I had my own room for like 1 year in grad school. And then after that, we moved in. And then, it was my first time living alone. And it was, God, I will say this, as difficult as those years were. I mean, you guys, I'm glad Child Services was never called on me, because we were doing this thing. Have you guys read the book Fred Stays With Me?
No.
It's a really good post-divorce for anybody who's.
I'm gonna write it down. I'm actually working on a blog post about this right now for kids.
Oh,
so
it's great. Okay. So it's for young ones, and it's, my mom lives here, my dad lives here. It's gonna make me cry, but Fred stays with me, and Fred is the dog, and so we were doing this thing where the consistency was, even though my lawyer said separate the dog, I was like, this is not what's like. It might be what's best for you legally. It's not what's best for my child.
Right.
So the dog was going back and forth at the time with Orly, and the nanny was going back and forth with Orly. So at least she had that. And like, I'd wake up in the morning on the second floor of this like crappy apartment and be like, I have to let the dog out, but my daughter's either asleep or whatever. I had to teach her, like, don't touch the door. If mom's not in the house, it's because mom went downstairs to let the dog be. Do not touch the doorknob. So the problem too was, it was one of these, like, again, so crazy 90s architecture. It was like kind of one of those like a business apartment kind of style. And so the handles, because of fire hazards, had to open from the inside, no matter what, even if it was locked. But you could tell if someone had tried from the inside to open it. So I would lock the door, go downstairs, let the dog pee, run back upstairs, leaving my not even 3-year-old daughter alone in the apartment. And one time I came back up and the door was unlocked, and I said, did you touch the doorknob? And she goes, no. I know you touched the doorknob. I know everything you do all the time, no matter what. Don't ever do that again. It's very dangerous. And she's like, okay. And eventually she was old enough to sort of come on walks with me and stuff. But like, as crazy as those years were, it was really freeing and liberating and beautiful. And like, we used to fight about like dumb stuff, like, me buying like brand name Perrier at the market. And I would like go across the street to the market and buy just like 6 bottles of Perrier, rebelliously like throw them in my refrigerator. It's just like the silliest thing, but it felt great.
It's liberation. It's liberation. Yeah. And I love that story, because I think that I try often to look at single parenting, especially single mothering, through other people's eyes. And I think that people still don't really understand it. Maybe we need to write a show about this, Dara, because I think people don't get, so there's a physicality about single mothering. And I have a story like that too, where I was home. So Wyatt was just Orly's age when I separated too. He was just 3. And he used to nap at the same time I would have to get Weston from the bus. And now the bus was just on the street. We were in suburbia on a cul-de-sac. So I would literally have to leave him in the house, right? But I would step outside just on our lawn, on our front lawn, watch down the street to make sure Weston could get off the bus and come up the sidewalk, right? Because I had nobody else. And one day, Wyatt wakes up
and I'm on the lawn and he comes outside, little 3-year-old puts his shoes on and comes outside. To this day, he's still traumatized by that moment. And I'm like, he's like, remember when you left me alone in the house? And I'm like, I was on the lawn. So like, you know, I think people don't realize there's a intense physicality about single parenting. I mean, you can't get packages delivered because you can't pull them into the house by yourself. You can't lift your kid up having a tantrum.
And there's also this fear of like, and if I act out and the kid tells the parent or does or if I do the thing, if I walk away for a minute, I could lose my kid. I could lose my kid is like always the thing.
Yeah, totally. And you are going through, look, people know this. I tweet about this. Like, I have depression, and like I was going through my own actual mental health struggles at the time, and I didn't have the right medication yet. And so like, yeah. And there are things that in theory your exes can use against you.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately, I will say that there were like very few instances early on where there was some of that. And I called him like early on at one point. I said, okay, look, we can play it this way if you want to. But you guys know my dad is the lawyer. my dad put like on retainer, like one of the fanciest lawyers in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
And I was like, or my father, and if we do that, my father will pay every cent in his bank account to make sure that I'm protected, which I know is not something that you want to get involved in. I don't think it's what's best for our kid. Like, I think we're both going to need coverage we're both going to have separate writing and producing careers, which means you're going to be writing and producing episodes. I'm going to be writing and producing episodes. We're going to need coverage from each other. We're going to need help from each other sometimes. Like, this is just not the way to go. And fortunately, he heard it. And in particularly when it comes to like, hey, I need a hand on whatever, it's a place where we've co-parented, I would say, most beautifully, which I think is partially a function of when we were writing together. We had this sort of constant, like, you write this script, then we'll swap. It was always like this sort of organic dance of like, I'm working on this, you're working on this, we'll trade the thing. And then now instead of trading off scripts, we trade off our kid. But I tell people, you know, that when they're getting divorced, it takes a Herculean kind of strength that like you didn't know you could even access. And I agree with you. I mean that physically.
Yeah.
Like it is so much physical. Like the kid is here, the groceries.
I mean, yeah, I was just thinking about this because I was thinking about writing about it the other day. The strength it takes to, while you're cut down to your core, take your child and get to safety, right?
Yeah.
Nothing else. And this is why, like, when I say to people like, well, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and people are like, that's are big ideas. Fucking, I can do anything I want. I've done that, right? Like anything else in the world is mine because I got through that moment, right? Like the actual, like, and because in our primal bodies, we were getting to shore, right? Like we had to like get our child to safety. And obviously it wasn't the same, right, situation, but that's how it feels. So
absolutely. Yeah.
When you were going through all of that and you had your apartment, what was your support system around you like?
My sister was amazing. My sister actually, the weekend that I like got the keys, I still remember the date I got the keys. August 29, 2014 was the day that I got the keys to the new apartment, and like needed to figure out what the fuck I was going to do and how I was going to outfit that apartment.
Yeah.
And fortunately I had taken the teaching job. So like that was money that was just mine, that like, because we were writing together, everything was split. And so it was a constant like spending one on what. And it was like, this was just, so I knew I had like $5,000 to outfit an entire apartment, and also got some like, you know, leftover furniture and lamps and stuff from other people. And in fact, there's a chest of drawers over here that was in my closet in my old apartment.
I love that.
So like I had friends, but I actually ended up gifting a lot of my friends to him because they were really important to him. And I was like, this is going to be painful to like try to navigate my old couple's life. So like a lot of my friends, I kind of said, I'm really sorry, but it was not my kindest moment, but I was like, I'm really sorry. I love you guys. But like, I told him he could have you. So that's what's going to happen. My sister came out to help me build furniture and like dragged me by the collar around. I was like a space cadet being dragged through IKEA being like, you needed this, you needed this, you needed this, you needed this. My parents came out for one weekend. And that was it. It was really mostly, I mean, I didn't, as you guys know, I don't really have family out here.
Yeah.
And I had this lovely nanny who is still in my life. I've had a success. I mean, that's another thing that could make me cry is there's this nanny that we had hired. Her name is Cara Feller. She now lives in Canada with her beautiful husband on a horse farm, which I think was a very smart idea for her. And she had gone to AMDA, the Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts or something. And she just fell in love with Orly. And when we started to get divorced, I was like, look, I will find a way to keep you in the country. She's Canadian. I paid for her visa. I paid for an apartment in my building. I feel like I was like, I will pay for literally, it was one of those, like, I can throw money at this.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, I don't care what my savings ultimately looks like.
Right.
The money doesn't matter. My kids' mental health matters and needs the stability of this lovely, loving nanny. And then when Cara ended up going back to Canada about 1.5 years later, she found another friend of hers from AMDA, whose name was Hallie, who lives in New Mexico. We saw her recently. And then Hallie gifted us a woman named Sarah Klingenpeel, who was our nanny until the pandemic. And then she, had to figure out what she was going to do with her life in the pandemic. And now we don't have a nanny, which is a whole, she's 11, she doesn't need one. And on the other hand, this has been really hard to do this without a person. But that succession of, we had a Zoom during the pandemic with me, Orly, and the 3 women who helped me raise her. And it was like so beautiful. It was, I just couldn't have been more expressive about how grateful I am to them. Cara, before she left, gave me a framed poster that says females are strong as hell. And I still keep it in my bedroom.
I get it. I really get it. We have our Emily who we love. And I keep saying Emily's a nurse, but I keep saying my first paycheck that we get in from Fresh Starts, I'm going to retire her from nursing and make her come live with us.
Because you need somebody to like be there and like take care of you, especially when you're a single mom. Like you need a wife, basically.
Yeah.
And like that function of a wife. And so like the nanny becomes that. Like Olivia is gonna have Emily. We're gonna get her that.
I so get it. And it's, when you lose your partner, you lose all the memories of your child's life with them. Right. I can't call my ex-husband and go, remember when Wyatt was born? Remember like the moment we shared? You lose all of that. Right. And so when you have somebody that loves your children, whether it's your sister or whether it's your nanny, you get somebody else to share those memories with. And again, that's something I think people don't realize. Like it's very isolating and lonely mentally to be a single mom.
I will say one thing that Chad and I do well is send each other, when like Apple sends us, our memories of the day or whatever, if it's a picture of her from when she was really little from a memory that we shared, we will send it to each other and say, remember when.
I love that.
And I, as much as sometimes that's hard, I also think it's important for both of us to visually remember that this is a thing that we did together, that we are still, for better or for worse, as they
working on that project. We're
still working on that project together. The part I find harder is when things happen now. I mean, now actually what's really nice is having this boyfriend who also has kids. Right. And so one of the beautiful part, I've never dated anybody with kids before. And I think it's one of the reasons that this was working is like, there's an understanding. We each put our children first. We've sacrificed a lot for our children and for those co-parenting relationships. And, now I do call him and say, I had this exciting day with Orly or whatever, but for 8 years, would happen. And sometimes the nanny's the person you share with, sometimes your sister, but really you're experiencing raising your child completely alone. Sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes it's like, oh my God, look what I did alone with my kids. But sometimes it's like, is this normal? Is this okay? This was a beautiful moment. I wish I could look at somebody and like share it with. It's really hard.
I'm curious too, because I don't talk to so many single moms. Do you feel like Orly and you have a more like adult relationship than like, because I feel like I talk to my boys like grown up people.
Oh yeah. No, it's actually really funny. She had parent teacher conferences yesterday. And the teacher, who I adore, was like, Orly sits at the front of the class and I love talking to her. And I said, yeah, you know, she's the product of two single parents, and like she's really used to talking to and spending time with adults. And I also think navigating this difficult co-parenting situation, I mean, I'll tell you the one of the more beautiful stories about the Fresh Start, but I think navigating the co-parenting situation has made her also, I think she's born this way, incredibly emotionally astute and empathetic.
Yeah.
And she works on that, and I try my best to nurture it. One of the crazier stories about my Fresh Start was, so like I said, my sister came out, we like painted the house, or someone else painted it. We oversaw someone else painting the apartment.
Because Olivia and I painted her house, and we got a lot of paint on the floors.
No. I actually thought about it and then was like, I can barely be in IKEA. Like this, no, we have to.
It's a bad idea.
We hired someone, we ate pizza in the empty apartment, we got everything set up, and then did what the therapist said to do, even though she was 2, which is like, you're going to have 2 places now. And like, but it was all set up. Her room there was set up before she got there, along with some familiar toys and familiar stuff. She goes to sleep. We wake up in the morning. The sun is streaming. I remember the very first morning, the sun is streaming through the windows. There's still some boxes. My internet was being glitchy. She asked for, I think she wanted to see Sophia the First. She was on a Sophia the First kick. And remember, 2 years and 3 quarters. And I'm getting frustrated, and I go, sweetie, I can't get that to work. Can we just watch something on the iPad? And she looks up at me and she puts her teeny hand on my leg and she goes, you okay, mama? And I said, I'm okay. And she goes, she nods, and I said, you're okay too, Orly. What would you like to watch? And she's like that all the time, all the way through the divorce. There would be moments where she'd just like grab my sweater and go, mama, breathe. Like, and I felt terrible because I don't want to like put that on a kid ever. And we would try to like address that. But yeah, I mean, I think I know that they say you shouldn't be friends with your kid. And like, in a lot of ways, I have a very strong parental boundary.
Right.
And I've even said to her, like, don't make me parent you. It's my least favorite part of this.
Very Lorelai.
Won't do something. I'm like, please just do the thing so I don't have to do this.
Right.
But we do have a really close relationship, and you know, sometimes I probably shouldn't say this publicly, but sometimes like her friends' moms, like the other kids' moms, will come to me and be like, what's going on with our kids? Because they know that Orly gets in the car and most days say like, hey mom, here's what happened today. And the other kids in 5th grade aren't doing that.
I think it is, and Weston and I are like that too, because you have to become partners in a way. And like, I wouldn't necessarily, I think partners is the best way I would describe it. Like you're, especially during pandemic times, right? You're alone in the house with these kids, and you have to navigate. You have your own language, you have your own culture, you have your own holidays. Like you just kind of create this world that's just like the you guys, and like it's so beautiful. So I'm curious, from a writer's perspective, do you see your life like a script that you're building?
You know, I always have. It's actually another thing that'll make me cry. I remember being pregnant with Orly in Los Angeles. I'm 33, which, you know, I was 33 when I got pregnant, which was basically in LA. I like to say like being a teen mom. Like, I mean, everybody has babies like in their 40s out here. And I would go to these like hippy dippy LA. I love yoga. Like I literally yesterday did 2 different yoga classes. I love yoga, but I went to like these prenatal yoga classes where these women were like, I feel so connected to my baby, and I like know exactly who they are. And, and I was like, I feel like there's an alien growing in my body. And what I came to realize is the way I was viewing it. I remember saying this. I remember which friend I said it to first out loud. I feel like I don't feel like she and I are one at all. I feel like I'm housing a story that's about to be born, and I play her mother in the narrative of her life, and she plays my daughter in the narrative of mine. And that makes us both really, really important co-protagonists in these stories, but her narrative is her narrative. And she's not one with me. So
that's so interesting, just on the topic of individuation, because I think for so many moms, it's hard to individuate from their child. And from an early point, you are already like that is her story and I'm in it, but it's not mine. It's not the same as my story. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm super curious about how it felt to go through this, sort of being a single issue voter when it comes to picking Chad, right? Of like, you're writing together, he's not Jewish, like this thing torturing you, and then going forward anyway. And then getting divorced and having your parents who are still married.
50 years this like year. 50
That's
years.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And from what I remember, very in love, so I wonder what that felt like, sort of going through divorce. That was not, Olivia, our parents, you remember when our parents got divorced,
Everybody's divorced.
right. Everybody's divorced in the family. And so it was like a shock. And Olivia and I were both like, wow, we can really do this. You can really get divorced. Even though we'd lived it, it was still such a shock. And our dad did the same thing. He got the lawyer, the Jewish dad, that's what they do. But I'm just wondering how that felt, like how that felt for your narrative, like what you thought like marriage was going to be going into it. And I'm curious.
Look, I think a few things. One is our parents were getting married at a different time. And my parents, by the way, always say that they feel like they lucked out because at the end of the day, like my mom really is one of the best caretakers I've ever known. So she is a little bit meant to be a mom and a wife. And, there are things in her life that like I wish in some ways because she grew up in the time she grew up and I wish she'd pursued a little bit deeper. We've talked about those things. She and I have a pretty close relationship still about all of that. My dad wanted to be a breadwinner, was a very good breadwinner, right? Like that might not have worked out that way. We all know men who've turned out not to be that guy or women who turned out not to be that woman. And so they ended up being really good partners that way. My mom survived 2 different kinds of cancer. He, saw her through those things. I think they take care of each other very well. I also think, I say this with love, knowing that they'll probably listen to this. I think there's a certain amount of 50-year codependence that comes with that. I also think, again, not a therapized generation. My dad does see a therapist. I don't know if you want me to say that publicly, but here we go.
So does ours. We'll throw that out there. So does ours.
So I think he does some work on himself in that way, but like, it's just a very different generation.
Yeah. And probably more of a single issue. Like he was Jewish, he was a good breadwinner, right? Like he was earner,
handsome,
like handsome, good head of hair, and then like right, he always had a great head of hair, and so like right, so like I'm sure right. Whereas we're like talking about values and morals and what do you want to do and what does your Saturday look like? It's very more complicated, obviously.
Yes, and so to their credit, I mean, I actually called them pretty early in my thinking about all of this and said, like, I think I'm in trouble. Like, I think my marriage is in trouble. And they couldn't have been more supportive. Like, I feel really, really lucky in that way that like there wasn't any of the thing that like some of my friends have gone through where it's like, you like you better make it work because like this is an institution and this is my parents were like, whatever you need. Do you need money? Do you need help? Do you need housing? Do you need, I mean, I think the only thing I sort of wish was, and because I think they don't understand that, like, it goes back to the Herculean task. Sometimes I have to say to them out loud, okay, mom, dad, I'm doing both of your jobs. Dad, I want you to imagine being as successful as you are and a partner at the height of your game while mom was also doing all the things that she was doing. I have to do both of those things at an A+ level all of the time. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
And there have been moments where I've been like, I need you to visit more and all of that. It's hard for them because like they have a life in New York and they really don't like Los Angeles. And so I got really lucky that like the fact that they've been married for 50 years was not ever a thing that they like threw in my face or expected from me. They understood all of my reasons. And I was, pretty brutally honest with them about the gory details of the divorce, at least in part too, because there were moments in the divorce where, my ex would be like, I'm going to tell your parents about this or that. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to take all that off the table and like call them right now and tell them everything. And at one point I called him and I said, well, that shit is now out, like now off the table, because I've literally told every detail I can possibly tell. So
find new blackmail.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, what is coming up for you next? You do so many amazing things.
That's a really good question. I mean, so I just finished one of the things that is not currently in my bio, I don't think, is that I just finished co-show running a show called The Horror of Dolores Roach, which will be coming out.
That is in your Wikipedia bio.
Oh, okay. So so that's coming out sometime this year. I think I have to give you Orly if I tell you when it's coming out, but at some point that'll be like officially announced. That was crazy. It was literally a project that took me through 3 years of the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like we sold the pitch the first week of this thing called Zoom that we are now currently on, that none of us had ever heard of before. And then ran an online writer's room, and then shot it in the summer, shot the pilot in the summer of 2020 or 2021. No, 2021, when there was still like a quarantine, like 2-week quarantine in Canada. We shot it. And then we waited on the pickup, and then we shot the rest of the series over this last summer. So this was a project that took the whole pandemic, and, you know, was really, really, really hard. And I'm very grateful because it meant I was employed through a pandemic and was the boss, so that I could do, you know, we were all homeschooling. You guys, we were homeschooling our children.
It was insane.
I have PTSD from that time.
Yeah, she really does.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely do. And it's funny because I actually think it's one of the reasons I was finally open to a relationship, because I think at the time that the pandemic happened, I was dating, and, you know, I've been dating on and off for 8 years, but I sort of had this feeling of like, I don't need anybody anymore. Like I make the money, I pay the bills, I'm raising my kid. I have this great group of new friends from eCar that like are like this wonderful scaffold and support system. And then it was like, oh wait, everything just went away. And it suddenly made me open to the idea of like, oh, maybe monogamy like is a thing that like interested in trying again. And, you know, again, I've met this lovely guy who feels really like a partner, which is, I mean, that's the thing that's been interesting is like, so The Horror of Dolores Roach, the first season ended for me. And, you know, I've been looking for my next gig. I have a couple of things that none of which are like close enough to going that I can talk about, but like, you know, doing the sort of like, I don't know what it's like in your end of the freelance business, but there are these moments where you're like, you have a whole pool of things that you're juggling and trying to get off the ground simultaneously. And you're like, whichever one of these things sticks is the thing. Because you have to also, in addition to we're creative and we're writers and we're entrepreneurs. We also have to pay bills and raise children. And so as much as like, there are moments where I think I'm going to be 50 when Orly's out of the house. And like, when I'm 50 is when I'm making like all my independent avant-garde movies and
we
like
can't wait.
all the things that I want to make. But right now I have to try to get a job. So, so I've been working on that, and I've been like building a relationship, which is a really new thing.
Is he Jewish?
He is not. He's Japanese. He's Japanese American. It's funny because my parents said like, but where is he from? And I said, he's from here. His family has been here longer than ours has. And so that was a sort of funny part of the conversation, but he's from LA.
Where'd you guys meet?
We met on set.
Oh, nice.
Last summer, he was the DP of the show.
What are you, Jenny?
I always tell people, so I worked in events for a long time, like large corporate events. Like I helped produce BlizzCon and stuff like that. And I always tell Olivia, I'm like, union guys are where it's at. Like, go find like a grip or a DP. Like, they're always like really solid. I mean, not all of them, obviously, but like so many of them are like solid. They're like family guys. Like I loved, that was the hardest part for me. Career-wise during the pandemic was like, I missed going on site with my friends because it's not the same as a movie set, but it's very similar in a lot of ways, right? You're putting up sets, you're taking them down, technical producers, you know, you've got like wires running everywhere. And I love those guys. Like, they were always really good husbands, like the ones that were married, and the ones that were single. I was like, you know, it was right around the same time Olivia was getting single. So I was always looking out. I always like, I shout that at the rooftops. And like, there's also so many men that work in like IATSE and stuff like that, where it's like, there's plenty of guys out there.
Well, and it's what's interesting for me too is, so I'm bisexual and the marriage was, as you know, hard, and the end of the marriage was hard. And so I mostly spent the last 8 years dating women, which was quite lovely. And it was not triggering, which was really nice, right? It was like, okay, like this feels different.
Yeah.
But I met this person, and I definitely wouldn't have been open to dating a man, I don't think. But we were working together. And so there was this boundary of like, we were becoming very, very, very close friends.
Right.
We would literally like shoot until like midnight, and then, walk around the studio until 3 o'clock in the morning and get 3 hours of sleep, and then do it again. And we would walk on the weekends and walk. We didn't get together until like basically like the second the show ended, because I was literally his boss.
Right.
But I'd forgotten what it was like to get to know a man for who they are. Like all of the people that I'd been set up with over the last however many years, or swiped on, which is just, we could talk about swiping for however long you want to, and I can talk about what a nightmare that place is. You're not supposed to make a decision about a human that quickly.
No,
like
I agree with you.
No.
We spent hours and hours and hours and hours sharing and getting to know each other's hearts, doing the thing that I was saying I did not do with my ex-husband, where it was like, what are your ethics? What are your morals? What are your perspectives? I knew by the time we started dating that this was someone whose heart I was deeply in love with.
I'm getting married, and I'm moving to Scotland, and I don't know if that's something so I'm
I
sure.
did not know that. That's amazing. I want to hear all the things.
So, but when he and I started talking, so he lives in Scotland, and when he and I started talking, what was I going to? Well, I booked a ticket after 2 days to go fly to see him, but then I canceled it because my Jewish mother was like, "You're gonna die," and I was like, "I'll take that into consideration," but I canceled it that night, and we spent 3 months talking. And he was on furlough because they were still in lockdown. And so he wasn't working. And so we would stay up, we would start talking, midnight his time. We would stay up until his 6 a.m, just talking for 3 months. And so by the time I flew there in October, I was like, well, let's just let's see, if this is it, let's make sure I am as attracted to him as I was when we met 11 years ago. And it was the same thing. It was like, we just talked. We talked constantly. We talked on text all day, and then we would talk for hours over Skype at night. And I think so much of it is, and when you talk about partner, Thomas and I always call each other collaborators. That's what we are to each other. We're collaborators. So little things like visa stuff, I'd be like, I'm getting really stressed out, and he'd be like, give it to me. I'm your collaborator. We have to do this together. And that's not an experience I'd ever had.
No,
before.
I didn't know people like that existed.
So I get it.
No.
Yeah.
No,
I mean, I definitely, it makes it very easy to spend time with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
And that, is not just about intimacy and all those other things that can be really scary, right? It's not just about physical intimacy. It's
emotional intimacy, which is
way scarier.
Really carries you through too. Is right. It's the biggest, scariest, and it's also the most important thing.
Absolutely.
So Dara, if somebody's going through a fresh start, what would be some wise words that you could impart to them?
I mean, I would definitely talk about the Herculean strength. This is going to take a certain kind of fortitude that you did not know was in you. And that means taking really good care of yourself. That whole adage of you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on your kid is very, very real. It's very tempting to do it the other way. And sometimes you do, and you suffer the consequences of that. But I remember there was a moment where I was just not eating. I was too stressed out. I couldn't eat. I couldn't put anything in my body. And it was probably also some sort of protest. And my sister looked at me and said, "You have a 3-year-old child, eat something." And she was right. I needed to fuel my body. I needed to take care of my mind. I needed to do those things so that I could be a mom, the right mom for her, which was part of the reason, like you've said, for seeking that, being on that Exodus journey and seeking that land of freedom is really about them in a lot of ways. And you
Yeah.
can't be there for them if you don't take care of yourself.
Yeah, so true. And then the hardest question of all, what was the last thing that you ate and truly loved?
So the last thing I ate and truly loved is a place I order from actually pretty frequently, which is Sugarfish. I think you guys have it in New York too.
We know. We have a lot
maybe
of our,
in the city. I've never been.
all
but
of
I've
our
heard
LA
such good
friends love it.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's, by the way, you should try it in New York. It's delightful. It's a very simple, clean menu. At one point I got a notification from Postmates I tried to support businesses in the pandemic that I wanted to see like survive. And I was ordering Sugarfish like probably 3 or 4 times a week. And I got a notification from Postmates that I was like one of their number 1 customers. And I was like, oh God.
Great.
But my sister came to visit last week, and you know how I feel about her and how precious our time is together.
Yeah.
And we did what we do, which is order Sugarfish and Gab and watch Below Deck and
text us. Yeah.
and text you guys. And it was really, food always tastes better with great company. I don't think I have ever had a meal that I loved that wasn't really about who I was spending that meal with.
That's true.
I love that. I love that. Well, Dara, we just adore you, and thank you for taking the time out. We could talk to you literally forever about everything. We have so many questions. We didn't even get into the entertainment industry.
Okay, wonderful.
But thank you for being here today.
Thank you for listening to today's story. We're always here, and we're so proud of you.
A Fresh Story is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to begin again. You can read the show notes and learn more about today's episode at afreshstory.com.